Welcome to episode 4 of the Seed Growers Podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Turnesol Cooperative Farm and spreadsheet and crop planning enthusiast. With the Seed Growers Podcast, I want you to get inspired to go out and save some seed on your farm. Annie Jesperson and Nathaniel Talbot of Deep Harvest Farm are this episode's guests. Annie and Nathaniel grow vegetables and seeds on Whidbey Island in Washington. In this episode, they talk about how they run a CSA basket program in addition to a seed company, and how they love having both businesses to balance out the seasonal workload and cash flow. They discuss how they manage to access land and build up their client base, how seed crops and vegetable crops share time and space in their fields, how they started selling seeds by setting up seed racks in local nurseries, and only once they had established themselves in this way did they launch an online store. How they grow most of the seed they sell, but they also work with some other regional seed companies to supply varieties that they have trouble with or can't grow in enough volume. Annie and Nathaniel also grow a few seed crops in larger quantities for these same regional seed companies. For this episode's technical deep dive, Annie and Nathaniel talk about growing beets for seed, how beets take 2 years to get to seed, and that means storing the roots through the winter, the spacing they use when they replant beets in the second year, knowing when beet seed is ready to harvest, post-ripening in a caterpillar tunnel, and how to clean beet seed. Oh yeah, we also talk about how to keep finches out of seed crops using bird netting. This episode is sponsored by the Organic Seed Alliance. Organic Seed Alliance is a US-based nonprofit that advances ethical seed solutions to meet food and farming needs in a changing world. OSA's work ensures an abundant and diverse supply of ecologically grown seed, tended in perpetuity by skilled and diverse communities of seed stewards. To advance this mission, we serve growers working with seed at any scale through participatory research, practical education, policy advocacy, and network development. Join our online seed community at organicseedcommons.org. Search our resources at seedalliance.org and read recommendations for advancing organic seed at stateoforganicseed.org. On a personal note, I also want to mention the Organic Seed Conference that OSA puts on every 2 years. I first went in 2008, and I learned so much about growing seed and the business of seed during the conference, and met so many seed growers, breeders, and seed companies. It was the single most influential and formative experience in my seed growing career. If you're serious about seed, you should give it a try. This episode is also sponsored by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. Seedheads is the cross-pollinating podcast where Canadian seed heroes tell their stories, share their how-to tips, and talk about the seeds they love. Join Steph Benoit and Hugo Martorell as they host conversations that are both technically useful and personally inspiring, as guests share the myriad ways that seeds are at the center of our lives as growers and eaters. If you're interested in hearing from people who are passionate about saving, stewarding, and sharing seed, subscribe to Seedheads in your favorite podcast app, or go to seedsecurity.ca/podcast and get started with seasons 1 and 2 of Seedheads today. Seedheads is a podcast inspired by Canadian seed growers and hosted by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, a program of seed change. Season 3 is coming in 2022, as always, with episodes in French and English. I'm subscribed to the Seedhead podcast, and I can't wait to listen to Season 3. So, Annie and Nathaniel, welcome to the Seed Grower Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan.
I'm really excited to talk to both of you because you live in that place of running both a vegetable farm and a retail seed business, something that not a lot of farmers have chosen to do.
Yeah, it might be, I'm not sure if it's the most recommended business model. It's kind of a lot of balls to juggle in the air pretty much year round, but we love it, and hopefully we'll impart that passion to the listeners for the next course of the hour or so.
I hope so. So how is your season going so far?
It's going pretty good. You know, February and March are probably our most mellow, relaxing months of the year. Before we really got scaled up in seed production, I would say that downtime was more December and January through mid-February, but it's kind of got pushed back into the later part of the winter and early spring now that we have 2 full solid months of seed sales and seed orders to fulfill in December and January through February. So we're kind of just coming out of that now, and this actual field season, production season's getting ramped up. The seed orders are slowing down. And yeah, we're starting to put on our Carhartts and jackets and get out there and do some bed prep and sowing, and which feels great because we've been cooped up for a lot of months here, just filling seed orders. So yeah, we're a little unusual compared to some farms in our region who are doing only vegetables. We look at our friends' farms on the island, and they already have an acre or two of crops in the ground, getting ready for farmers market and early restaurant sales. But since we're mostly focused on seed production and CSA, we don't really have that early season pressure to get our vegetables going, which is actually great with our soils and our hydrology, because we have a pretty wet site here on our farm, a pretty high water table, and often we have fields that are still underwater partially through early May. And so different parts of our field are kind of drying out between February and May. And depending on the season, it could be a really slow start or a quicker start, depending on how dry things are. So it's been kind of a wet and cold one this year. And so we're getting a slower start than usual, but that's actually works pretty well with how our business is evolving toward a later sowing date with our seed crops and CSA. CSA doesn't start till June 1st, which is kind of a later start than some folks do it around here, but it works well with our soils. So
I should actually probably ask you, where is around here for deep harvest?
Well, we are located on the lovely Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound of Washington. So we're about 45 minutes north of Seattle, and a little bit south of the San Juan Islands, which a few people know about because it's a vacation hotspot.
And how did you wind up farming?
Well, in college, both Nathaniel and I were biology majors. So we're coming to this with a deep love of plants and ecology and soils and the natural world. But I come from a long line of farmers. I'm from North Dakota, and both of my grandparents were farmers, and my great-grandparents, my parents weren't, but I kind of have farming deep in my bones. Nathaniel, on the other hand, came from a different background.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the West Cascades, kind of in the foothills of the mountains there in Oregon, south of Portland. And my folks had a huge garden and a small orchard. And so kind of I was instilled with that place in nature and that love of plants and ecology as well. So I'd like to think that those childhoods kind of raised partially in the wild instilled us with a love for nature and what would become a career in farming to some degree.
Yeah, and while in Portland, I was working for an organization that helped folks on the streets get into housing. And part of my job was helping people connect to each other and get settled in their housed lives. And we spent a lot of time going to the Oregon Food Bank and gardening together. We paved a big parking lot and put in a garden at our drop-in center. And it was doing stuff like that that really kind of lit me on fire for, continuing to do more and more with my hands in the dirt. And I met Nathaniel, who was also inspired by the idea of learning to farm. And we decided to pursue a learning opportunity to see if farming was going to be for us. So we left Portland for a couple of weeks in the summer and explored different universities and farm training programs, and ultimately ended up at what was at the time called the Green Bank Farm Agriculture Training Center. It's now known as the Organic Farm School here on Whidbey Island. And through that program, we kind of got firsthand experience learning how to grow food and also run a small business, how to run a CSA and grow some seeds. And it kind of gave us our first little launching pad to what is now our vocation and our love, our career.
The Organic Farm School, if I'm right, they also grow seed there. And is that one of the things that inspired you to go in that route?
Definitely. The fact that seed was a pretty integral part of the program description was one of the big selling points of this program and why we chose it over some of the other ones that we investigated. They had some established kind of contracts with High Mowing Seed and a couple other seed businesses. So built into the curriculum was managing a couple small seed contracts, production seed contracts for wholesale. And so we learned a lot from those experiences. And also when we were students, we had to kind of write up some mock business plans that would hopefully guide us in our career. And I did mine as a small seed company, just kind of walking through what the finances and production would look like to run, a very small seed company that could provide an income for one or two people. And our instructor at the farm training center kind of helped us flesh out those ideas while also showing us production in the field. So yeah, it was a really great experience for cutting our teeth on a little bit of seed production.
Yeah, and also part of that program, we were the first, but we had an opportunity to run a small incubator business on that land. So after 3 months of our training at the training center, we decided that farming was for us, we thought, and we decided to have a fall and winter CSA that year. So October through February, or maybe it was November through February that season, we had a winter CSA for about 30 CSA members. And that went surprisingly well, shockingly well. And after that, we started renting some land from some older farmers here on the island and kind of continued to hone our skills. And that's all kind of led us to where we are.
And so you're still on the island now. So it sounds like you jumped in somewhere and then it turned out to be the right decision and you started the incubator program and then just kept going and all in the same spot. And you're still on Whidbey Island at this point.
Yeah, it's been great. We're so lucky to have been able to stay here because land is hard to come by. There isn't really much proper farmland. It's mostly small farms cut out of what was once old growth forest.
At least here on South Whidbey.
Yeah, there's a bit of farmland in central Whidbey. But yeah, so we were lucky to find a couple opportunities that allowed us to stay. The first being like a low rent lease where we could save money and kind of develop our skills in seed production and vegetable production. And so we leased a farm for 3 years on South Whidbey. And during that time, we were looking for a more permanent option to purchase or long-term lease. We were looking far afield all over the Northwest, but the opportunity that landed in our laps was actually here in Freeland on Whidbey Island. And the way we came about that was through this kind of large letter writing campaign in which we kind of told our story in the form of a letter and dropped this letter off into mailboxes next to vacant pastures all over the island, hoping that one of these landlords would find our story compelling and give us a call back and consider kind of some alternative arrangement to finance a piece of land with us. And it worked out. We got one of the most beautiful little pieces of 10-acre pasture in the sun, kind of overlooking the Puget Sound that we ever could have hoped for. And we've been here for now, this is our 7th season here at this farm and our 11th season on Whidbey Island.
And just a tiny bit more about that is, we were able to acquire this piece of land because it wasn't on the real estate market, which was definitely outside of all of the properties in the real estate market were outside of our price range. But finding a woman who kind of liked the idea of supporting aspiring farmers in the community was key to affordability for us. And the fact that we had been leasing land as farmers and having farming be our entire income for a couple of years allowed us to show on our tax forms that we had generated over 50% of our income from farming, and then qualified us for loans through the USDA and through the Northwest Farm Credit Service, which ultimately led to our land acquiring success, which it was no easy task and continues to get harder and harder as time passes for young farmers like us.
That's really a great series of opportunities that kind of brought you there. And so congratulations.
Yeah, we really lucked out.
So you started on the incubator farm with a CSA, a winter CSA. Did that CSA just continue through these different iterations of your farm?
Pretty much. We have probably 20 folks who have stayed with us for nearly a decade at this point. We kind of gleaned them from the farm school CSA program, and they followed us into our winter CSA, and then they followed us to our leased farm, and now they're here with us, 10 years into our farming business. So yeah, a lot of folks have seen us through many iterations, and our CSA has grown from being about 30 people to now being 120 shareholders, June through December. And there's a lot of couples and families that have been on this ride for a long time with us and supported us every step of the way, which has been a true gift.
And in addition to the CSA, are there any other ways that you market your vegetables?
Yeah, definitely. So prior to COVID, we were doing farmers market, which was about a third of our gross income. CSA was also another third or a little more of our gross income. And then we haven't had another, 10, 15% for many years that we sold through about 6 to 10 restaurants on the island, as well as a couple grocery stores. So yeah, quite a diversity of outlets for our vegetables, but all sold and marketed within about 15 miles of our farm. There's quite a supportive food eating community, local eating community here on the South End. So we're really lucky not to have to pack our van up and hop on a ferry and go to one of the bigger destinations on the mainland near Seattle to market our vegetables. It's all here on the island.
But yeah, during COVID, we decided to stop going to farmers market. We'd kind of been considering that for a number of years just to reclaim our weekends. And COVID kind of pushed us to expand our CSA and stop doing farmers market. And trying that out for a couple of seasons has led us to the great passion that we've developed for being able to hike and camp and relax on the weekends instead of working those extra days. So yeah, I don't think we're going back. I think it's all seed and CSA here on out.
That's a lovely combination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, Dan, really fast, that we were kind of worried for a while because farmers market was such a huge part of our gross income that we weren't sure how we would kind of make that up with all our other outlets. And it ended up working out more beautifully than we hoped with the kind of COVID bump in seed sales that we saw, that pretty much all seed companies saw. And so that easily kind of filled in the gap of what would have been our farmers market income. That with a little bit of increase in CSA customers and a little extra wholesale, you're actually able to more than make up those farmers market accounts. And so it was kind of perfect timing, and we're really lucky it worked out that way.
So you have a vegetable farm and you have a seed farm. How do they share space or how do they share their space on your farm?
Yeah, that's kind of a moving target. It changes a little bit every year, but I would say we have about 4 or so acres in production every year on our home farm, and about an acre of that, maybe a little less than that, maybe 2/3 to an acre of that is seed production on our home farm. We also have 2 isolation plots within 15 miles of our farm for growing seed crops that would otherwise cross with our vegetable or seed crops at our home farm. So they allow us to do more varieties of the same species here on South Whidbey that we could otherwise do on our home farm. And those are about 1/2 acre each as well. So we have almost a couple acres in seed and about, on a given average year, about 3 acres in vegetables as well. And the way they share space on our farm just kind of depends on what crops we need to grow out every year. We try to block all of our seed crops together as much as possible, just because they have a lot of the similar cultural management requirements as far as needing drip irrigation and trellising. Sometimes they need bird netting. We can talk about our finch predation later on. And they are often in the field, or always in the field, much longer than their vegetable counterparts. Many of them are biennials. So they have a lot of the same requirements. And for simplicity, even though it kind of messes up our crop rotation based on families, we found it's much more elegant just to keep all the seed crops together, just because of the production and field kind of management needs.
So do your vegetable fields look like a vegetable farm, and then you have these tall, gangly plants beside it? Is that kind of a clear distinction in your fields then?
It becomes a clear distinction as the season goes on. The first, up until June, they look somewhat similar up until May, and then the seed crops start stealing the show, really, and flowering like crazy and attracting, the vast majority of our pollinators and looking all crazy and wild and woolly, but yeah, they blend in for part of the season and then really draw the eye for the second half.
Mm-hmm. There are some exceptions for our self-pollinated crops that we can grow several of on the farm, but still need a bit of isolation, maybe 25 to 50 feet for, the tomatoes and peppers and peas. We'll have little blocks of seed crops all around the farm just to maintain that isolation, yet to fit several varieties on 5 acres. There might be a seed crop, a pea seed crop in the middle of a lettuce field, just because that's the only place we could find for it to grow. And that's where the soil was dry and the beds were able to be ready in time. So it's not quite as elegant as we would like, but we're working toward it. There's a lot of variables to layer on top of each other with irrigation needs and soil moisture and plant family rotation and
isolation
distance and how long every crop is in the field, which can range from 35 days for radish to 18 months for some of our biennial brassicas. So it's a complex matrix, and I would be lying to say that we've figured it out, but that's the gist of it.
So Nathaniel, you mentioned that you wrote a business plan for a seed company. Then you launched a farm, which sounds like it was more of a CSA. How soon was it before you started saving seeds of your own, on your own field? Or was that just something that happened right away when you started growing on that leased land?
So yeah, when we got started at that lease, which was about 3 acres, and we were lucky to have a fence and an irrigation system and a little barn there to reduce our capital expenses that first year. And we got a couple small contracts with high mowing, which was a great learning opportunity. I think we did arugula and rob and maybe spinach, and some of them did better than others. We had some clubroot issues at that farm, so some of our brassica seed contracts weren't quite as successful as we would have hoped. And so that got us kind of going, got our wheels spinning in seed production on that new lot. And then the next year, based on some of the crops we had just casually saved seed on, as well as a little bit of the seed that we had kept for ourselves from those high mowing crops, as well as a couple other ones that we intended to sell for packet sales. We took about a dozen varieties and created little seed packets and built a couple little wooden racks and just set them in 2 nurseries and hardware stores on Whidbey Island. So it was very modest, just a dozen varieties at a couple spots, maybe made a couple $1,000s at most. And ever since then, it's grown. Now we have about 18 seed racks all throughout the Puget Sound area and 140 varieties. And it's been a pretty linear growth from that initial 12 variety seed rack about 9 years ago to today. Sometimes I think of packet sales period as retail and kind of bulk contract as wholesale, but that's not true. We did wholesale packet sales through nurseries for the first several years and just started our retail online seed store about 4 years ago. We felt like our brand was picking up, the seed sales on the racks were doing pretty well. There was great reception about our product from the seed reps at all these nurseries, and we figured that in order to actually start making money with the seed business, which up to that point was more of a labor of love than it was really a significant part of our income, we should probably start trying to sell these for their full value online and cut out the middle person. And so we launched our website maybe in 2018, and now that makes up about 20% of our income or so, the online store.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that it took you that long to do the retail store and that you started off with racks, because it's nowadays it feels, and I know things have changed, but it feels like you could just open up a Shopify or other online store platform and just have seeds up and running. Was it just a matter of having so many other things on your plate, or were you worried about going online, or were you wondering if it would be worth it?
Well, I think just going online was kind of like, I think maybe it felt a little premature before we had built a name for ourselves. And the wholesale racks were an opportunity for marketing and letting the community know that we were out there. We've been really fortunate to have our racks in a lot of huge beloved nurseries from Olympia up to the San Juan Islands and around Seattle. And it's kind of been our main source of getting the word out about who we are and what we're doing. And so I think, the amount of time and energy and money that goes into building a website just to then cross your fingers that someone stumbles upon it didn't feel totally worth it until we had a little bit of buzz around our seeds. And then when we went online, people knew to look for us and had heard of us. Otherwise, it felt like kind of shouting into the void or something.
Yeah. But even still, Dan, even after we had built up our brand for, 5 or so years with seed racks, when we launched our website in 2018, we only got 3% of our sales from our online seed store on that website for 2018, and then for the same amount for 2019. So it was just a tiny trickle of orders coming in for those first 2 years. And it really didn't change and become profitable until COVID, when people just started flooding to whatever seed company online they could find that had seeds available. And so between 2019 and 2020, our online seed sales jumped from 3% of our income to 20% of our gross income. And so it was, and granted, we didn't put a whole lot of work into advertising or search engine optimization or marketing online. So we were kind of just letting it do its thing organically out there. But even that said, we were pretty shocked by how few seed sales we were getting online. Those first couple of years, the website was up and the seed racks were pulling their more than their share of the weight for our seed business, even through those years.
And I think the relationships with seed buyers at nurseries and having an actual physical presence just feels a little more like us than being an online marketing company and an online business. We went store to store and introduced ourselves to all of these people who would have a relationship with our seeds, and had the physical demonstration of our crops, on these seed racks. And, it just felt a little more like us, I think, and still does. But, having a online seed store is helpful economically and positive in terms of getting more seeds out to the world. But we do like having the seed racks around, because a lot of people come up to us having seen them in places and then feel like they have a more tangible relationship with us and what we're doing.
How would you compare the workflow between dealing with like seed orders for individuals through your online store, and then also seed orders for rack clients, like throughout the year? How does that compare?
So up until 2020, the online store seed orders for individual customers, we can just kind of count them as negligible because they were so few. And so it was primarily seed rack orders from nurseries. In 2020, they became competitive, and they were about the same. So we have a huge push in January to get thousands and thousands of seed packets out onto 15 to 18 different seed racks in the area. The racks are stocked with kind of 40 to 70 varieties based on the size of the rack, and we start each rack off with 10 of each variety. And so we're pretty much packing all the way through January, morning through night, just to get those initial orders fulfilled. And once those go out, usually in the end of January, there's usually a lag for a few weeks as those seeds get sold down, and then the reorders, the restocks start to come in sometime in mid-February or end of February. And then we have a pretty good routine where we collect orders through the week and have usually 2 full days of order fulfillment and shipping out on both the retail and the wholesale seed packets. And so the orders are coming in online as a trickle, several a day, sometimes more. And the seed racks usually come in. I wouldn't say there's a huge difference between the workflow of nursery order fulfillment versus online order fulfillment. All the seed packets are still just on the shelves in the same place, and we put them in similar types of boxes, and they go out with the same type of label. And they're just bigger orders. And sometimes we have to do a huge kind of re-inventorying, pre-seed packing push before we fill some of those larger nursery orders. But otherwise, it's pretty similar type of work.
Yeah, and the seasonality of both income sources are similar as well. Seed orders are coming in online really hot in December and January, and that's when the nurseries want their racks stocked as well. Seed orders for both kind of slow down at the same time in April and May.
Which is kind of perfect because that's when our jobs become 60 hours a week outside, just managing field crops. So the decline in seed orders mid-spring kind of dovetails perfectly with how the field ends up working up here on Whidbey Island.
So it sounds like it's a really community-based seed operation. Are you also, like, how much of your seed, or how much of the seed that you sell is seed that you grow on your farm or your isolations?
Up until last year, it was almost all of it, with the exception of a few things we bought in, just kind of during emergencies from some of the local seed companies, also regional organic seed companies. But we had been growing all of our own seed for the most part up until last year, when our kind of catalog just kind of grew outside of the cusp of our management abilities. And we decided to take on a few outside growers to grow some of the harder to grow varieties in our climate, as well as things that we just didn't have isolation for. So last year we bought in about 10 varieties or so from other regional organic growers, and we grew about 180 or so probably ourselves last year. And of the 140 varieties, I would say 130 of those are grown here on the island by us. It might not stay like that forever. I'm not sure what it's going to make sense in 5 years, how we spend our time. And once we have a little finer lens on our profit margins and kind of some enterprise budgets of specific seed crops, it might make more sense to contract out more and more of those varieties. But right now, we're pretty proud to have most of our seed coming from Whidbey Island, crops that we've had our hands on and our eyes on and have done our own selection on, and know that the quality is high, and that these seed crops perform well on Whidbey Island and hopefully translate well to the other similar growing regions in the Northwest. It's a lot of diversity to manage on our farm, and it's a lot of isolation to try to manage on a small number of plots, but it keeps things interesting. And so far, we're edging toward more and more every year as far as less and less, but I'm sure that threshold will be reached sometime soon.
Does more and more mean less vegetable for CSA, or does it mean more acreage, or how does that magic work?
So far, it means just using more and more of our farm and not really scaling back our CSA. It's been nice to have both. This year, our seed business did kind of decline just a little from the past 2 COVID years, and we still have the CSA to keep, income stream going well and to be able to pay our employees well and cover our costs and pay ourselves. And so, it's really nice to have a diverse number of enterprises to have that extra security. As we age, we probably would like to grow on less of our land and keep more of it in longer term cover crop. But for now, it mostly means just using more space.
Our production field that's in cultivation is broken down into 8 different 2/3 acre fields, or more like 0.6 acre fields. So there's 8 of those, and we've been opening up an additional one. We started with 4 years ago, and every year we've been opening up an additional field every year just to meet our growing demand. And so we are now maxed out. We have all kind of 8 areas in production this year. And so now we're going to have to do a little more fine tuning of which crops are profitable and which crops don't make sense on our scale, and probably start dropping some things to make room for new additions. But up until this point, we've been able to just turn over more land and get more things in production.
What does your farm team look like to support you in this year-round operation, doing all kinds of different types of things?
Yeah, we have an incredible team. We have 2 full-time-ish workers from April through December. We've been incredibly fortunate to have an employee who's stuck with us for 6 or 7 years now, a highly skilled farmer who ran his own operation for a number of years and has come on our team and kind of just been, a solid presence here for quite a long while. And then we've had a rotating other employee, usually folks who stick around a couple of years at a time. So we have 2 full-ish time workers most of the season. And then in the off season, we have part-time folks kind of pinch hitting with seed packing help. We also rely on work traders to get the CSA harvest done. And so we generally have around 8 to 10 folks who come for a couple hours a week in exchange for their CSA share. And they kind of help pick those labor intensive crops like strawberries and peas and beans and cherry tomatoes, things that we just wouldn't have time to do as a really small, tight crew. We've always tried to keep our labor costs at a bare minimum. So every year we've kind of increased an employee for a half day here or a full day there, but never really launching into having a super heavy workforce. Just as students, as part of the farm training program, we heard farms time and time again through farm tours say that their biggest expense was their labor. They weren't able to make a profit because of labor expenses. And so we kind of have very slowly added support for the 2 of us really intentionally so that we could always come out in the black. We also, one of our employees for the last couple of years has been involved with the Organic Seed Alliance seed production internship program. So, it's one of our full-time employees, but on the side is doing this training through the Organic Seed Alliance to better understand the ins and outs of seed production. And so that employee kind of gets prioritized to help with the seed work so that they end up leaving the experience of being on our farm with their own seed growing chops in the chance that they would want to continue onward with production seed growing themselves. And then they just become an incredible asset on our farm as they learn to manage well the pests and disease and trellising and all the other needs of the seed crops, which are quite special.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing that we're excited about with the growing seed side of our business is the opportunity for year-round employment for our workers, as everybody struggles in the farm community here with the seasonality of farm labor and the inability to keep good people around year round. And it causes a lot of great employees to leave during the winter and not come back just so they can pay their bills. And so we're hoping that in the next couple of years, we'll be able to, or maybe even this next year, be able to provide 2 year-round positions for both of our employees to keep them seed packing and doing order fulfillment and infrastructure and helping with planning during those off-season months. Because we've been lucky to have a lot of our employees come back, every March and April, but it's hard to live through a winter here on Whidbey Island and find work. So that's something that we're pretty excited that the seed business can provide.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. The goal of No-Till Growers is to help produce and create valuable niche content like what you're listening to now. We create several different podcasts, from the Winter Growers podcast hosted by Clara Coleman to the Collaborative Farming podcast with host Jackson Roulette and many more. We produce videos at the No-Till Growers YouTube channel, including farm tours and crop-specific breakdowns. And our entire model is to create helpful, valuable farming content that is free and open to the public, so anyone, anywhere can use it. So if you appreciate that and our work, or are simply enjoying this show, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers. There are also other support options at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can even purchase a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, because when you purchase it directly from no-tillgrowers.com specifically, the proceeds go to making you more amazing content like this. Okay, that's my spiel. Thanks, you all. Back to the show.
Now, how about August? How does that work on a vegetable farm that also grows seeds? I happen to know there's work in both of those categories.
Yeah.
It can be a pretty intense time. It can be an emotional roller coaster, for sure, because you're right. The vegetables are at their peak, peak harvest for beans and tomatoes and zucchinis and cucumbers, and all of those veggie crops need picking twice a week. And then the seed crops coming right. It's a task to prioritize. Nathaniel is always looking at things from a seed crop lens, and I'm always thinking about what the CSA is going to need in this week's share. We kind of divide up things a little bit that way and make sure the crops in each of our priorities get taken care of. We're lucky to not have to go to farmers market. If there's a rainy day in August and, in the past we'd have to be at farmers market, but now we have to get some seed crops out. We have the luxury of being able to do that versus, just, shrugging our shoulders and letting those seed crops get rained on. So not having to go somewhere on the weekends is pretty helpful in seed harvest season.
Yeah, August is the busiest month for sure, but the seed crops do mature at a staggered procession through early July through early October, really. And a large chunk of that, a high majority, is in August, but it is spread out for 3 or 4 months. And so it's not like everything is happening in August, and that goes for the vegetables too. That being said, we do have to really keep a close eye on the weather, specifically in August, because there's generally 1 or 2 kind of freak rainstorms that come through and catch us off guard. If we are not ready with the personnel and the equipment to get seed crops out of the ground that morning or the day before, we can be in a bad situation. So we might have to, for the CSA that is on Tuesdays, we might have to do the bulk of our harvesting on Sunday or Monday so that we could spend Tuesday, which is a normal harvest day, actually harvesting seed crops instead. It also really helps just to have a bunch of equipment and infrastructure ready for that seed processing and that harvest and that post-ripening that needs to happen that type of year. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time moving things around and making space in your barn and your greenhouse to pull tarps into to get out of the rain. We have a designated caterpillar tunnel that we can always pull seed crops that are swathed and tarped underneath to get them out of any inclement weather. And we have a great kind of crew, like the B team crew of work traders and just friends who know what we do and know that sometimes we need to put them on kind of our speed dial and call them over in a short time's notice to help with a bit of seed harvesting. And so there's always a few kind of tense days in August that we're wondering how everything's going to get done, but somehow it always does.
Yeah, I mean, we do have our weeks broken up into a schedule that definitely allows for intentional veggie work and intentional seed work as well, which just kind of helps organize these various tasks in our brain. And for the most part, we're harvesting on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Wednesdays are huge seed days, and Fridays are the catch-all day. And then, the weather throws a wrench into that schedule, but that works to kind of orient our minds so that, everything has a place to get accomplished.
So in addition to running a retail seed business and your racks and your CSA, before we started the call, you told me you're still growing some seed contracts for some other seed companies. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it hasn't been a focus of our business since those early days when we were kind of experimenting with some contracts. We found that the stress and kind of the sense of responsibility and accountability to these other companies was a little more than we wanted to take on a given year. It was just a little more anxiety producing than your average seed crop or vegetable crop for our own production needs. That combined with the pay rate for a lot of these wholesale crops, it just didn't really pencil out when you compare it to locally sold retail vegetables and seed. And so even when we had good yields on a brassica or spinach crop sold to other companies, and even when they're paying pretty well and we negotiated a slightly higher price than they're offering, it still just didn't quite make sense on our small scale for the amount of bed space we were willing to allocate to these contracts. And so we've really kind of moved away from that and focused almost primarily just on our own seed needs for our packets. That being said, there are some great opportunities still to collaborate with a handful of the local kind of Northwest regional seed companies. So I wouldn't say we do contracts outright, but we do grow things on contract for a couple companies that we're otherwise already growing for ourselves. So for example, we do a couple beets, and we might grow 10 pounds of a fewer Kugel beet for ourselves and 20 pounds for uprising, or 10 pounds of Shiraz beet for ourselves and 30 pounds for adaptive seeds. And that really works well because for a number of reasons. You want a large number of plants anyway for genetic reasons and to not create any inbreeding depression in the population. And so when you're planting out 200 beet roots for a seed crop, it's probably more seed than we would ever be able to sell through our small company. We might get 40 or 50 pounds of seed. And so it's nice to have an outlet for another local seed company to sell that through. Also, it's just nice to kind of build that camaraderie with other seed companies and to have them support us for a few crops and know that we're supporting them for a few crops. It's just kind of a great window to create a relationship and a line of communication. So you're always talking about seed together and troubleshooting together and helping each other out. And it makes it feel kind of like we're all on the same team as opposed to competitors or just business colleagues. And so I really like having the relationship of growing some of the similar varieties as the local seed companies that we can then grow and sell to each other. The price per pound is also much higher when you're just selling, 10, 20, 25 pounds of beets than you would for a 100 or 200 pound contract with some of the bigger seed companies that we've contracted with. And so for our small scale, when we're not really growing more than a bed or two or three of any given seed crop, having that higher price point to meet our kind of minimum profit needs per bed is great with these smaller contracts with the local seed companies.
So Adaptive and Uprising, these are farms that you're also getting seed from. So it's helping with the resilience of your business in addition to helping the resilience of their business with this kind of arrangements.
Yeah, definitely. If we have a crop failure, we don't like to just take in varieties that we've never sold. But even if it's a variety we haven't sold for seed that we're familiar with, we could be like, oh, hey, we've had a cilantro seed crop failure, Adaptive. Do you mind selling us 5 pounds of X variety from we know you have on bulk? And they're usually more than open to that as long as they have it in inventory. There's usually, as long as there's an open line of honest communication, most folks don't have any problem with you reselling their seed that you buy from them. And we're finding more and more that we just can't really grow seed on a few things very well. Like we've tried on leeks for several years in a row now, and we just don't have a long enough, warm enough season to mature that seed. And so buying leek seed from Adaptive allows us to carry a variety that we know grows great as a vegetable crop here, but that just can't be produced for seed. But down in Oregon in the Willamette Valley, it grows great for seed. So finding those opportunities to collaborate where it makes sense has really allowed us to kind of strengthen the diversity and the resilience of our seed catalog.
I'd love to talk about beets a little bit because they can be a tricky crop. What does beet seed production look like for you?
Beet production on our farm, we do it a pretty standard technique. We grow our beets as we would vegetables in the fall. So we sow midsummer for our fall beet harvest. And we often select or harvest an entire bed of beets, usually several thousand beets or so. And we select out maybe the best 200 to 400 beets based on root shape, color. We'll do a few cross sections and inspect the rings inside, leaf vigor, disease resistance, make sure there's no canker or kind of ugly beet syndrome on any of the beet skins. So based on a variety of parameters, we select a couple hundred roots, we cut off the tops, we throw them into bags of wood chips and put them in our walk-in cooler for 5 months or so. Then they usually start to sprout little root hairs at the end of winter, early spring, around the same time that we have a few beds drying out to replant them into. We generally plant them at one row, about a 12-inch spacing. And then over the next few weeks, they'll start to sprout new leaves. And then soon after that, start to bolt and put on flowers, which are wind pollinated. Then it's usually just 3-foot field stakes every 10 feet or so to provide the support for some baling twine, which is a simple trellis. And usually keeps them upright, as much support as they need. And then once this beet seed starts to dry down, once the what we think of a beet seed is actually a fruit that usually has several seeds in it. But once those fruits are at least 70-80% brown on the plant, we'll harvest it. And the rest of them will often post ripen just fine out of the ground on tarps in our caterpillar tunnel that we use for post ripening.
Can I jump in right here and ask you what are you looking for when you're deciding when it's time to harvest them?
Ideally, we would wait as long as we can until all the plants are perfectly ripe outside. And that just means that all the fruits have turned from that fleshy green color to a more dark, crispy brown that you would recognize as a beet seed that you would buy. And so they should look like you would buy a beet seed and receive it in a seed packet there on the plant. And a lot of plants have a great ability to post ripen after you've harvested them, which means that after you've pulled them from the ground and put them on tarps and laid them out in the sun, they'll continue to kind of photosynthesize and send sugars to their seed and mature and ripen their seed. And so beets have a great ability to do that along with brassicas. And so you don't need to harvest them when they're 100% brown. If there's inclement weather coming and you want to protect those 80% of seeds that have already ripened, and there's a storm coming through and you want to get them out so they don't get wet, you can pull the whole plants, put them under cover, and usually that last 15 to 20% will ripen no problem. And so we're just looking for that kind of, it's somewhat subjective, but that, that 80 to 85% ripe on the plant.
Would you ever cut parts of the plants off, or you just take the whole root out?
Yeah, you absolutely can. You'll find that different stems mature at staggered rates. And so you can cut individual stems off. We have done that before. Sometimes if maybe 50% of the stems on a majority of the plants are ripe, we will go and cut the most unequivocally ripe ones off before a storm. It's pretty tedious to do that on anything more than 100 plants or so, and you don't get much seed at a time, so it's not ideal. And most seed will survive and endure a small amount of moisture and rain, more than you would realize. They're pretty resilient. What we've also done is throw geotextile cloth over the entire bed. So just having a few sheets of that lying around. Our beds are 125 feet long. So if you can have a 10-foot wide by 125-foot long piece of geotextile fabric just sitting around that you can pull out right before a rainstorm and actually throw it over the entire bed, the entire plant, the rain will just slough off and keep the plants perfectly dry. And you can just pull that off when the rain's gone and the plants will continue to mature. So we've done that. We've harvested individual stems before, but ideally we like to harvest whole plants just for the efficiency of it.
So you've harvested the plants, then you let some after ripen, and what are the next steps?
The way we thresh the majority of our seed crops that, are on anything more than a few bed feet of plants is with a vehicle, either our farm truck or our farm van. And that just entails laying the plants out in rows on geotextile fabric and driving the heck over it for as long as you need to release those seeds from the stem. The more mature and ready those seeds are to come off the plant, the easier they will. If seeds are not coming off the plant easily, it usually means those seeds are not fully mature and ripe and shouldn't probably be threshed anyway. So any green seed that is left on the plant, we can try to post ripen for another few days and see if it'll thresh off, but usually that's going to be the least immature vigor, or the least mature and least vigorous seed anyway. So we might just leave that out of the seed lot. And so then we have a geotextile fabric sheet full of broken stems and seed and large central stems. And that's when we do our first screening step, which is like a large field screen made out of 2x4 and hardware cloth, 1/2-inch hardware cloth. And we can get the majority of the big sticks and stems out that way just by running all that material through that quickly. And then at that point, it would go into a secondary cleaning step, usually involving a winnow wizard.
Is the winnow wizard adequate to separate the seeds from the other bits?
Yeah, it absolutely is based on density. If there's any pieces of dirt or, heavy larvae or rat poop or little rocks or anything, the winnow wizard won't separate that out as easily. That'll definitely need to use screens for. But as far as density separation, the winnow wizard is just a jewel. It's really increased our efficiency and quality and lot size ability. I don't like to use the word game changer because it's silly and cliche, but it's really been that one tool that's really upped our seed cleaning game more than we could have ever imagined. And if you're doing any type of seed production on commercial scale that, is approaching, I'm not sure where the cutoff would be to warrant buying a winnow wizard, but 15, 20% of your income coming from seed, and you're spending more than several days, in front of fans, box fans with yogurt containers, trying to winnow sticks out of seed lots. It might be worth considering a winnow wizard. It may not pay for itself immediately, but the vast improvement in quality and ergonomic life improvement using that versus box fans, I think is well worth it, even if it takes a few years to pay off.
I want to hear about those finches that you mentioned earlier on.
Annie, we do have a slight division of labor where when it comes to seed production, I have a little more of my hands in the action, and Annie is much more involved with the vegetable management and seeding and CSA management. So forgive me if I'm speaking a little more in this part of the interview, but I'll back up and say that we love having birds on our farm. We are all pretty much avid birders, and half of a given day's field banter will be about birds and bird song and what we've been seeing flying around the fields that day. So it's an absolute gift to live in such a wild place. We've planted a couple thousand feet of hedgerows to attract more birds and native pollinators, and are doing whatever we can, putting in nesting boxes to keep them around. That being said, there are a couple species that have found us on the map and know that we are a great source of protein and fat in July and August, as particularly our brassica seed crops are ripening and our spinach seed crops are ripening. And it's mostly house finches and goldfinches and some blackbirds, but the finches are the big ones. And we really haven't heard of anyone else having a problem with these birds to the point where they actually cause like economically significant damage, more than just a few percent of a given crop being lost. So we've had to kind of innovate, and we've found a really good bird netting that works well for our bed length and our field size. And essentially we just create these big tents out of bird nets, out of T-posts and twine. And if you get them on the seed crop early enough before the finches realize there's food there developing, they will never know what they're missing. If you get it on, the week after the finches realize there's, nice maturing kind of milky spinach seed in those plants, then they will do whatever they can to break through that netting, strangling themselves, getting caught, sometimes chewing holes in it, getting in there, not being able to get out. And it becomes 2 months of finch management in your nests, releasing them every morning and then hoping they don't find another way in. So it can completely relieve you of bird worries and crop loss, or it can cause more problems if you do it too late. So it's it can kind of cut both ways. But if applied at the right time of the year, it's been an amazing tool just to keep bird predation off of our seed crops. The netting is super expensive, and so we have to really prioritize where we put it on and make sure that we're grouping all of our bird sensitive, bird prone crops together so that they can all go under the same net. So it creates a little bit more management complexity of making sure that you don't put a kale seed crop in between maybe a beet and a carrot biennial seed crop, because those crops won't be affected by birds, just the kale. You don't want to waste that really expensive bird net on one bed of kale. And so grouping all of your bird prone crops together has become one more thing that we have to think about in our crop and seed management plan in the off season.
So we've talked a bit about the logistics of fitting seed into a vegetable operation a little bit, and I guess vice versa. But there's also a benefit of growing seed on your farm, that you have the seed. Is your farm grown seed an important part of the seed that you use on your farm?
Yeah, it definitely is. We use our farm grown seed for all of our salad mix production, 95% of our beets and carrot production, the vast majority of our tomatoes, all of our kale, and those are some of our priority crops for our CSA and for our restaurant and grocery store sales. So yeah, we're really fortunate to be able to double our seed production for sales and then for our own farm use. I'm not quite sure the exact percentage that we're using of our own seed, but I would venture to guess that it's around 70% or something like that in terms of volume. So yeah, it's not insignificant.
And beyond that, we just feel really lucky to have found great open pollinated varieties through our extensive variety trialing that we now grow for production to sell through our catalogs and for on-farm vegetable use. Because man, the price of hybrids are just going up and up. And it seems like more and more the big kind of seed outfits are moving in the hybrid direction and just charging an arm and a leg for them. And so you don't spend a fortune on those seeds. You have to make sure each one germinates, and that usually means starting them inside and tending these transplants with a lot of care. Whereas with our seed, which we have in bulk that we produce a lot cheaper, we're able to direct seed and then thin out. And so a lot of things like grazing mix, even broccoli and cabbage will direct seed and then thin it out, as opposed to spending the time to start these expensive hybrid seeds and in cell trays in our crop house. And so that's saved quite a bit of time and expense just by finding open pollinated varieties that we can direct seed in mass. And it's just great knowing as our seed company has evolved and our farm business has evolved, knowing that we are much more self-reliant than we used to be on our own kind of genetic sources of crops. As more and more people seem to get interested in seed production and know the importance of self-reliance, the seed companies aren't moving that way. They're moving toward more and more hybrids, which prevent the self-reliance of seed saving. And if not hybrids, then other kind of proprietary techniques like utility patents or PVPs. And so we're pretty happy that we have that security kind of underneath our belts, and that we can kind of pull from our own stash whenever we need to. And if we do still grow a few hybrids for things that there really aren't a lot of great open pollinated options, like some of the Brussels sprouts and fall cauliflowers and things like that, we still rely on hybrids. But for the most part, we're trying to find an open pollinated substitute for any hybrid that we're currently growing, and that so that we can kind of eliminate that from our dependence, things of inputs that we're dependent on.
Yeah, which really was important during the COVID years when farmers everywhere were really freaking out, farmers and gardeners, about their inability to get the varieties they wanted. We felt very secure in having our own supply.
Before the conversation, you mentioned that you'd like to talk a bit about how you curate your own seed collection. Do you want to add more about how you select your varieties or curate your collection?
We could talk about that a little bit more. Yeah. We make sure that we don't add a new variety to our collection unless we've done a variety trial first, so that we feel confident that a variety that we choose does well in the Northwest and for the majority of our clientele. So every year we pick 10 or 12 different crops that we're going to buy, pretty much every variety that we can locate, to test against one another, so that we only have the tastiest, best yielding, prettiest, cutest of crops.
Maybe not cutest.
Well, maybe in our catalog. So I have my own priorities. So this year we're doing trials for Napa cabbage and marigolds and colored carrots and yellow zucchinis and a whole bunch of other things, just so that we can get a look at what's out there in the open pollinated seed world, and make sure that we're adding things that we can market with confidence to our farmer and gardener friends.
Yeah, and I think one thing that maybe makes us slightly unique, although there are a lot of companies that do this as well, is that we're not really interested in varieties that don't really perform well in kind of organic commercial production systems. So kind of the prima donna varieties that need super high soil inputs or a lot of care and monitoring for disease and pest presence. We're not super interested in those. We want them to stand up to our check varieties and our standard workhorse varieties and our CSA. So that we know they'll do well in other folks' gardens and small scale commercial operations. And B, that we can then incorporate them into our own vegetable production and use that seed for our CSA and restaurant sales. And so we're really looking for open pollinated varieties, whether they're heirlooms or more modern bred OPs that do well in small scale, kind of low input organic systems. Whereas a lot of kind of catalogs just have hundreds of amazing, beautiful heirloom varieties of vegetables and flowers. A lot of those are really more meant for garden production and not necessarily made for commercial appeal. And so we're not really going for those types of varieties as much.
And that farm customers and farmers market customers or local eaters would really enjoy. This is one of those areas where it's really nice to have a CSA because as we're trialing a bunch of different yellow zucchinis, our CSA members are going to be the guinea pigs, and they're going to try them all out, and they're going to definitely let us know which ones they thought were delicious and which ones they can live without. So we kind of have a weekly member survey, kind of informally, of crops that people are enjoying and ones that they aren't, and the ones that they aren't going to make it into the seed catalog. So it's a place where those two businesses work really well.
Now, what would you tell your younger seed-saving self?
This is a hard one.
I would tell ourselves to start going to the organic seed conference earlier, and start, building those relationships with seed growers and, seed folks in our region as soon as possible, because those relationships have been totally invaluable to us. It's a tight-knit community, really open-hearted and super knowledgeable, and it's small, and they'll welcome anyone in, and the earlier that you can start those relationships, the better. And we started that fairly early on, but for folks who are interested in getting into this work, that is like as good a place to start as any.
Yeah, and going so far as not just having a friendship, but maybe even pursuing a job with one of these folks. We jumped in, in our late 20s in our farm careers, and we were a little anxious just to hit the ground running, because whereas a lot of folks start in their early 20s or late teens as farm interns or woofers or seasonal workers, we didn't want to spend several years doing that. So we kind of jumped right into our own business, and then ended up making a lot of the mistakes ourselves that we probably could have made on other people's farms just by watching, or watch them make the mistakes, that is. And so had I been able to go back, I maybe would have prioritized at least a year on another seed farm, one of the wild garden seeds or adaptive seeds or uprising or Siskiyou seeds, one of the many awesome kind of regional, really farmer-led, organic, open pollinated, value-based seed companies that we have in our area, and learn from them. I mean, we've tried to play catch up through emails and phone calls and building these relationships after the fact and learning as much as we can from them. But it would have been great to have a season with one of these who we see as our mentors, and who we really look up to and are inspired by. But other than that, I think we did it okay. We never got burnt out. We never took on too much at one time. So just piecing one thing in at a time, not taking on too many contracts your first year, not trying too many varieties for packet sales your first year, but just taking things slowly. And I think we did that, and I think we benefited greatly from it.
And what would you say to market growers who don't currently grow seed? Like, how would you inspire them or convince them to start saving seed on their farm, not specifically for sale, but just to start being part of the seed world, or to start being part of the seed cycles?
I find it incredibly gratifying and empowering to have your own source of seed that you grew, that you are sure is, something that you like and feel good about and enjoy, and that you don't have to, cross your fingers is available in the next season for you to be able to grow again. It's a definite source of empowerment, and it's a source of beauty on your farm, because taking things to seed is a whole different visual experience and emotional experience, and a longer relationship with a plant.
I would say, just to jump in on a small scale, maybe just try without even getting a contract, but just choose a variety that you grow a lot of, that you direct seed a lot of, maybe like an annual plant, like an arugula or a spinach, and maybe you plant a bed of that and harvest the first half for food for your CSA, and let the second half go to seed and harvest it in August for seed, and just see how it goes. See how you enjoy the process. Notice when the plants bolt, what kind of pollinators come, what kind of pests and diseases might occur. Experiment after a bit of research with different cleaning techniques, and just see how you like the process, how it unfolds, and how it fits into the kind of workflow of your farm otherwise. If it causes a ton of stress, if that 1 or 2 seed crops make you freak out in the middle of August, maybe it's not a good idea to take on more than that. But if you really loved it and want to find a way to fit in more, then you can maybe call up a small seed company the next season and try to grow a few pounds of something. Everybody's looking for growers. Well, not everybody, but the industry as a whole, let me know if you agree, Dan, it seems like is looking for more growers. There's more demand than there is supply, especially as it regards to the organic seed program's requirements of using organic seed whenever possible and available. That requirement is certainly not being met. And so, yeah, there's a lot of demand out there for seed, which means we need more growers, and most folks will be willing to take a chance on you if you show a bit of enthusiasm and interest, and have some chops under your belt, and have tried a few kind of experiments with seed production. So just jump in, and whether it's for your own production or a small scale contract, and see how you like it.
Yeah, and one last thing that I would say is just make sure that you do your due diligence with talking to seed growers in your area before taking on contracts, because there are a lot of seed companies that are just really scrounging for growers, and they won't necessarily do the research for you in terms of what's going to work well on your farm in your area. So just, reach out to that seed growing community in your region before really taking on contracts yourself, because folks, your friends and people in your area will be able to let you know if that's going to work well or not if you haven't, practiced it yourself.
Yeah. The tomato and eggplant contract in Northwest Washington probably isn't the best place to start. So
that's amazing, because where we are here, the tomatoes is the thing that the perfect starting point. Maybe not eggplants, but tomatoes for sure. Well, thank you, Annie and Nathaniel, so much for being on the podcast, and have a fantastic season.
Thanks for taking the time and being interested in what we do, and hopefully folks found a few kernels of information worth taking with them.
Thanks so much, Dan.
And that's episode 4 of the Seed Growers Podcast. A huge thanks to Annie Jesperson and Nathaniel Talbot for being on the podcast. You can find Deep Harvest on Instagram, and their seed store and farm website is at deepharvest.com. A huge thanks to Sophie et Delton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophieetdelton.com. The Seed Growers Podcast is produced in part by No-Till Growers with the help of our sponsors, the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and the Organic Seed Alliance. A huge thanks to Jackson Roulette and Jesse Frost of No-Till Growers for making this podcast happen. If you want more farming podcasts, you should check out their other shows. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at goingtoseed.net. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode, would you? Until then, happy farming.
Scratch that, Dan.
Dan,
Annie's looking at me like she has a different interpretation of history.
I think in our early years, we were pretty lucky to get some seed contracts. Sorry, we got to talk this out. We grew spinach and Rob and arugula, and I think the spinach and Rob went fine.
Okay.
And then the next year we grew Mizuna.
We don't even need to talk about those contracts. We could just talk about the seed.
But no, I think that you should just say that was our first start.
Okay.
Okay. We're ready, Dan. This is a long time ago.
All right. I'm going to start this one over too. I'm kind of rambling. We're green on the podcast.